Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into the wild, high-stakes story of Jamestown. Now, you might think you know this one, but it's a tale of ambition, disaster, and just sheer survival that really set the stage for America, but probably not in the way you were taught. Let's get into it.
So think about it for a second. How do you build a country from scratch? I mean, if someone just handed you a ship and pointed you towards some unknown land, where would you even begin? The English investors behind Jamestown, well, they had a plan. But reality, as it turns out, had a very different one.
And this, right here, is the heart of the Jamestown story, the massive gap between the dream and the reality. On one side, you've got the plan, a straightforward, get-rich-quick scheme to find mountains of gold. And on the other side, the brutal truth, starvation, sickness, and just total despair. So how did it all start?
Okay, first things first. Let's follow the money. Because Jamestown wasn't some noble quest for religious freedom like the Pilgrims a little later. Nope. This was a for-profit enterprise, a huge, high-stakes gamble launched by some very savvy and maybe a little too optimistic investors. The engine powering this whole thing was something called the London Company, which was a joint stock company. You can basically think of it as a 17th century startup. A bunch of English investors pooled their money together to fund the whole colony, and they were expecting a massive return on that investment from all the gold and silver they were just sure was lying around in Virginia.
And listen, this wasn't some small bet. We're talking $10,000, which was an absolutely gigantic sum of money back in 1606. With that much cash on the line, the pressure to turn a profit and turn it fast was just immense. And that pressure, it would shape every single decision they made and almost destroyed the entire colony. All right, so now let's see what happens when that big money business plan smacks right into the wall of reality. The colonists land in Virginia in 1607, and their high hopes just immediately evaporated. It was a catastrophic failure right from the jump.
I mean, it was like a perfect storm of bad ideas. First, they chose to settle on a swampy peninsula. Sure, it was good for defending against attacks, but it was terrible for, staying alive. The drinking water was bad, the place was crawling with malaria-carrying mosquitoes, and this is a big one, the settlers themselves were mostly gentlemen. These were guys who had never done a day of hard labor in their lives. So instead of planting crops, they spent their time digging for gold that simply wasn't there. You can see the problem, right?
Now, to really get the scale of this disaster, let's just look at the raw numbers, the human cost. It all starts with 144 men and boys setting sail from England, their heads filled with dreams of gold. But the tragedy began way before they even hit land. The journey across the Atlantic took 4 grueling months, and it claimed 40 of them. Just think about that. Nearly a third of the colonists died before they even got a chance to see Virginia. And this is just staggering. After less than 1 year in the New World, between the hunger and the disease, only 38 of the original settlers were still alive. 38! The colony was basically on life support, about to be wiped off the map entirely. So how does a colony even come back from that? Well, on the absolute brink of collapse, Jamestown was about to face its darkest hour and find a new, very different kind of leader. And that leader was Captain John Smith. He was a tough, battle-hardened soldier, and he was exactly what these gentlemen colonists needed, even if they didn't want him. He took one look around and saw that their priorities were completely backward. And this quote pretty much says it all. Smith laid down the law with one simple, brutal rule that changed everything. He forced every single person, no matter their fancy title back in England, to pull their weight. They started building better defenses, they actually planted crops, and for a little while, things started to get better. But then, of course, disaster struck again. John Smith got badly injured in a gunpowder accident and had to sail back to England. And without his leadership, the whole colony just fell apart. The winter of 1609 became known as the starving time. It was horrific. Hundreds died. By the spring, the last 60 survivors, they just gave up. They got on a ship to go home. It was over. But, and this is like something out of a movie, as they're sailing away, they run right into brand new supply ships arriving from England. So they turned around, and Jamestown was saved at the literal last second. So the colony survived by the skin of its teeth. But just surviving wasn't enough for the investors back in London. They needed profit, and they were about to find it, not in yellow metal, but in a green, leafy plant. The next major player in this story is a guy named John Rolfe. Around 1612, he starts messing around with a new, sweeter kind of tobacco. See, smoking was getting super popular back in England,
and this new Virginia tobacco was an absolute sensation.
And just like that, the entire economy of the colony flipped upside down. Their search for gold, that produced a big fat zero. But tobacco exports, they went through the roof. They had finally found their cash crop, their brown gold. And while it would save the colony, it also came with some very, very heavy consequences.
Because a booming tobacco business needs a huge workforce. At first, they used indentured servants. These were people from England who agreed to work for a few years to pay for their boat ride to America, and after their time was up, they were free. But then, in 1619, something pivotal and tragic happened. A Dutch ship showed up with about 20 Africans on board, and they were sold, not as servants who would one day be free, but as property. This was the beginning of slavery in English America.
So now, with a stable economy and a growing but complicated workforce, Jamestown could finally start to become a real, permanent society instead of just a failing business venture. And that year, 1619, was a turning point in more ways than one.
By 1619, the population had exploded to about 1,000 people. To encourage them to stay, the company sent over a shipload of young women to become wives and start families. But maybe the most critical thing that happened for the future of America was the creation of a new kind of government.
It was called the Virginia House of Burgesses, and it was the very first representative assembly in America. For the first time, colonists could actually elect people to represent them and help make laws. This is it. This is the tiny seed of American democracy being planted right there in the tobacco fields of Virginia.
So let's just pull all these threads together. What made Jamestown what it became? Well, politically, you've got the birth of representative government. Economically, you have the total failure of finding gold and the massive success of tobacco. Geographically, that swampy location was both its defense and its death trap. And socially, it was this really complex mix of unprepared gentlemen, hopeful indentured servants, and tragically, the very first enslaved Africans.
And all of that leaves us with this final, really challenging question. That one year, 1619, gave Jamestown two of its most powerful legacies: the dream of democracy in the House of Burgesses, and the brutal nightmare of slavery. These two founding principles, freedom and bondage, were born in the exact same year, in the exact same place, and they would define the central conflict of the American story for centuries to come.